Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. We're here for the news this morning on April the 28th. It's a Tuesday. Keep jogging on, and what did they say? What did they say? Keep plodding along. That's what they say. We keep plodding along. We've got some big news this morning coming from the Telegraph. I'm look a bit choppy here. Is everything all right? Slow down. Steady on. Steady on. There we go. Big news this morning coming from the Telegraph that Manchester United are interested in signing Declan Rice of West Ham. Let me get that on the screen. There we go. This is one that was reported a little bit last summer, and it seemed to go away coincidentally around the time where he woke up from a nap, like someone who had been taken over by an alien or drugs. And in that time, we've seen this rumour sort of die down a little bit. The idea of United signing Declan Rice has sort of been pushed to one side in favour of the likes of Jack Grealish, of the likes of Jaden Sancho, that kind of thing. And it seems as though that for a long time a defensive midfield target wasn't necessarily on the list. Until last week we heard rumours that coming from The Athletic and Laurie Whitwell talking about United potentially wanting a more defensive signing, a more defensive midfielder to sign, and at that time there was no real names linked. There had been no one mentioned for that role other than United are interested potentially in a defensive midfielder. And I think this is something, before we get onto this article about Declan Rice, I think this is something that we've talked about on Stretford Paddock before, and we've discussed in the comments, and a lot of you at home would potentially agree on, and you'll have to let me know. United only have got one defensive midfielder in the club, as far as I'm concerned, and that's Nemanja Matic. I think Scott McTominay does a good role in that sort of holding area, but I think he's again a more traditional central midfielder, number 8. Fred the same. I think has excelled and exceeded expectation at defensive midfielder this season. But I think one of the reasons we always play with that 2 holding players in midfield is because we don't really have anyone that's a sort of an in their prime, out and out defensive midfielder. Again, Matic is potentially the only real defensive midfielder we have, and he's 31 and looked washed up about 6 months ago. So I think that there's definitely potential for United to need that kind of player in the squad. There's definitely a hole in that position, I would say. I think we're looking very good in terms of midfielders now. We've got Bruno, we've got Pogba, we've got McTominay, we've got Fred, who are all very good players, and any combination of any 2 of those, as we've seen even when it was Fred and McTominay earlier in the season, they can all do a job. And I think that just having 2 of them in there, any 2 of those 4, great. And obviously Fred, Pogba, or sort of Fernandes and Pogba maybe being the top of the pops in terms of that. But if you've got McTominay, if you've got Fernandes and Pogba playing in the same team, can you have just a single McTominay behind him, just a single Fred behind him? I like how I'm saying it like there's some sort of unit of measurement rather than a human being. But you understand what I mean? Can one McTominay, Scott Mc1 in A, be in behind Pogba and Fernandes and do that job by himself? Or do you need someone that is an out-and-out defensive midfielder? And I think we've seen Matic improve a lot more than anyone thought he would. He looked... The Everton game last season, I thought he would never play again for Man United after that game, let alone be one of our better midfielders in this run that we've had of 11 games unbeaten. And I don't think anyone really expected that. But what the problem is with players, once they hit those lows that we saw from Matic, the next time it's a little bit easier to go that low again, and the time after that it's a bit easier to go that low again, and eventually you don't really get them back, like we see with Sanchez, and you see with a lot of players as they get older, and that consistency starts to drop a little bit. Because one of the great things about Matic throughout most of his career is that you're getting a 7.5 performance every week from him, and sometimes you're getting a 9, but at worst you're getting 7.5. And now we've seen they can give a 3 and a 4, and that those performances, whilst they seem to have gone away in the short term, you can't necessarily plan for the long term. Now we've seen that he can drop to those to those sort of lows. Who knows when he will drop to those again? And I think a defensive midfielder may well be a better option. People talking in the comments, Zakaria. A lot of people seem to like Dennis Zakaria. Dennis Zakaria is one of those people who I've seen a lot of him on FIFA, and not much of him in real life. And I think he's quite highly rated in the Bundesliga. It looks to be a good player. But the thing with Declan Rice is, and I'm not comparing him to Michael Carrick because we know how good Michael Carrick became, but there was a similar feeling when United signed Michael Carrick, of who is this lad? If he was that good, he'd have played for England a lot more by now. If he was that good, why hasn't he done this? He don't really get any goals. He don't really, and I don't think Declan Rice is as good or has the potential that Michael Carrick had. One of the best passers I've ever seen. One of the and positionally I would say the best holding midfielder I've seen at United. But there was a similar kind of feel of like, who is this? Why do we care about this guy? So I wouldn't necessarily rule it out because, again, we've seen from the scouting and the transfers under Solskjaer so far that there has been a lot of excellent signings being made. Let's get into the article then. It's from the Telegraph. So again, it's not it's not written on a toilet wall in someone's feces somewhere. This is the Telegraph, who are a relatively, they're a quite reliable source, often tier 2 on Reddit. And one of the more reputable newspaper outlets to get transfer news from. West Ham brace for battle to keep hold of Declan Rice, with the club preparing a squad overhaul. The likes of Chelsea and Man United could look to swoop for the 21-year-old midfielder. Let's not forget he's 21. It's not like he's 24, 25 and you think, he can improve a hell of a lot from where he is now. I know people like to make quick judgments on players and he doesn't necessarily pass the ball forward that much. He's a bit more of a Rice crisply squared the ball. That's a terrible joke. Rather than passing it forward, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. He's valued at 70 million by West Ham. Now that is where even my goodwill starts to sour a touch. Do we think there's any chance that United should be paying 70 million for Declan Rice? Let me know in the comments. Rice is going to cost about 50 million or 70. Zachariah will cost us 30 million max. The thing is, we don't know that though, do we? We don't know how much someone like Dennis Zachariah would cost us. We don't know how good he is, really, because none of us watch 40 games a season of Bundesliga, and as much as we like to think we do, we don't. And I'm not having a go at you because I'm the same. You see players in different leagues and these sort of... Look, a good example of that would be William Carvalho. Remember him in Portugal at Sporting? He was set to be the best young defensive midfielder in the world. He looked brilliant for Sporting Lisbon. Again, we'd never really seen him play, but the highlights and you see how physically commanding he is. Where he plays in Spain for... Who's he play for now? I don't know. One of the ones with the green badge, the green triangle, Betis. And it's just, again, Renato Sanchez is another one. Similar kind of position, that sort of industrious midfielder from a league that we don't really watch that much. We saw him at Swansea, we saw him at Bayern Munich, we saw him in different clubs. And, I think there's a reason why these highly rated youngsters don't always get the move. You think, well, what? Same with like Draxler's one of them. Renato Sanchez is one of them. William Carvalho. You think, why aren't they? If they were that good, they'd be playing week in week out for a top team by now, and they aren't, and they never did. And I do wonder, Dennis Zachariah is this sort of young. Again, he's 23, I think, so he's older than Declan Rice. He's had a couple more years' experience at the top level. And I just think that, I'm not having to go at him. If United signed him, I would trust the scouting department and that kind of thing. I just think the Premier League thing, the Premier League proven thing, and as much as anything, the sort of Premier League proven idea, whilst we've discussed it before, and I think there is merit to it, I think some of it is, we've just actually seen them play against the same opposition. We've seen what Declan Rice can do against Chelsea. We've seen what Declan Rice can do against Man City. You see him against the opposition he's going to be playing in against for another team. So you don't have to worry about how does Man City's press differ from Dortmund's press, or how does sort of West Brom's sitting back like we may have seen a couple of seasons ago. How does that differ from Frankfurt's drop back kind of thing? So you don't have to worry about those translations and those equations. You just see it and you know how it will work in those systems. So I think it's a bit more of an easy comparison to make. I hope we get Sancho instead of United. Don't know what that means. When Partey is 40 million, it's not worth it. Again, Thomas Partey is someone who looks to be on his way to Arsenal, if anywhere, this summer. Maybe just sort of vying for a better contract at Atletico with this move. His dad was coming out a few days ago talking about a potential move to Arsenal. So who knows that one? But I don't think United are really linked with him. Indeed, he was cost the same as that Rice rumour and better than the two of those lads named with league experience. I personally think Ndidi would be perfect I think we may be slightly surprised by his lack of technical ability. On the ball, he's not particularly great, but his defending is as good as anyone in the league in that position. I would say he's especially since Kante's had his positional change over the last couple of years, we've seen him depart from that sort of pivot anchor role. I would say indeed he's the best defensive midfielder in the league. In terms of, as in his defending is the best of any midfielder in the league. And I think he'd be brilliant at United. But I think he would cost more than 7. I think he's 80, 90, 100 million because he's 22. And he is, like I said, the best tackler in the league, the best defensive midfielder in the league. I hope we get Sancho instead of United. Right. Oh, sorry. You hope Paddock FC gets Sancho instead of United. That's Stretford Paddock fan TV there. God. It's like Inception in here these days, isn't it? Kimmich, that's who we need. I don't think there's any chance of that happening. The problem is, Matic, Ndidi, Kante, even Doucouré get recognised with their performance. Rice doesn't put in a 7 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 every match. There is potentially that. Again, he is a young lad. And when you look at all those players, Ndidi's the one standout there. But where were they all when they were 21? Kante was playing in France, about to get a 400 grand move to Leicester. Matic was, I think, either at Chelsea, about to go back to Benfica, or at Benfica, about to come back to Chelsea. He was, a young lad not really doing much. To be a 21-year-old defensive midfielder starting week in, week out in any team, you have to be sort of ahead of your years slightly, let alone to be one of the standouts of West Ham's side. I think Declan Rice last season, I don't know if he's quite been as good this season, but I know last season, his breakthrough season, he was excellent for West Ham. And I wasn't saying... No, someone just said, just joined late and thought you were saying Rice is the best CDM in the league. No, I'm not saying that. Just simply because I haven't seen enough of him. Some saying McSauce is better than Rice. Oh, we're getting towards a delicious dish here, aren't we? Just a bit of McSauce onto some rice. I need breakfast. That's what I need. West Ham may have financial issues. Well, there's a chance of that. They always seem to get big money on kind of fallen stars, don't they? So who knows? Rice this season, 87 tackles, 41 clearances, 61 interceptions. 86% pass accuracy with 1,300 passes. 87 tackles is a high amount of tackles. That's a good amount of tackles. I think that the top tackler in the league is on 100. I think it's either Ndidi or Ricardo, and they're on just over 100. So he's in that ballpark of one of the top tacklers in the league there. What about Garner? Isn't he a good prospect? He is a good prospect. He's not a robust tackling midfielder like Declan Rice is. He's a different style midfielder. He can play a little bit deeper, but he's more of a passer and mover. And he's actually this season upped his goal scoring and trying to sort of up his attacking output as well. So I think if anything, he's moving away from defensive, maybe into a more attacking role. He's certainly not a sort of a in-your-face, strong tackler like Declan Rice is. He's not that kind of player. Okay, let's move on to our next story then. Today, and this is an update on Jaden Sancho. I've put it as the second story because, come on, we've just about had enough. I'm saving, the only time that we're talking about Jaden Sancho as the main article of a news story is when big people make big claims about him. Until then, he can be consigned to be in the second story, even though this is a direct quote from one of the directors of football at Dortmund. So this isn't like some spurious Express or Daily Star article by any means, but let's read it. This is coming from sporting director Michael Zorc, which is a great name, sounds like a villain from a kid's cartoon. Michael Zorc on Jaden Sancho's future. There is no new situation, currently no club willing to risk anything by making a big money move, not even in England. We'll have a long-term contract with Jaden Sancho, and that is why we are totally relaxed. So basically, that sounds to me like, come get him, boys. No one's after him. No change in the situation. We did see similar quotes coming out before United signed Mkhitaryan from Dortmund. We did see similar quotes coming out before Barcelona signed Ousmane Dembele from Dortmund. So I would take this with a little pinch of salt in the sense that, you sort of say, oh, they're not going anywhere. When, of course, until they leave, you might as well say they're not going anywhere, because if the deal breaks down, you have to have them in the dressing room the next week. So he's not going to come out and say, well, we're trying to get rid of him as much as we can because we need the cash, but so far we ain't got a deal. He's not going to say that. He is going to come out and say, well, he's got a contract with us. He hasn't signed for anyone else. Shut your mouth. So take it with a little pinch of salt. Take it with a grain of Declan Rice, and just, it's what it means is, you can tell from the quote. What I would read more into that quote is, like I said, he's certainly not going to come out and say we're trying to get rid of Jaden Sancho, because look what happened with Gareth Bale's a good example of that. We saw that last season. Zidane basically saying it's probably best if he fucks off, isn't it? He don't like it here. We don't like him. I don't like his silly hair, and his legs are a bit skinny. That's basically what Zidane said about Bale, and then they didn't manage to get rid of him, and then he sat there on the side. By the end of the season, he's holding up flags saying that he prefers golf to Real Madrid. So that's how you create a toxic environment in a dressing room, or between players and fans, and between managers and fans, managers and players. Sorry. So he's not going to come out and say anything like that. But the more telling point of that is what he does give away about a transfer, which is where he says there is no new situation. No club currently, which again is almost like a, come on, you've got the future here to do something. Currently, no club will risk anything by making a big money move. Not in England. I personally read more into him using the word currently in terms of this deal is possible than I do by him saying that nothing's happening at the minute. Because of course, if it hasn't been done, why would he say any other? So if anything, it gives me encouragement and hope, that quote, more than it gives me reason for dejection and sort of a downside to, or a potential negative to the transfer. Personally, I think it's, if anything, he's just saying, give us some freaking money and you can have him. It's a perfect match of chess. Woodward comments transfers. Zorc comments transfers. Your move, Woodward. Yeah, exactly. Imagine playing against someone called Zorc in chess. You just think that their chess pieces had little lasers in their eyes and they would destroy your pieces, like some sort of wizard's chess. Every time you lost a person, the whole board sets on fire. Zorc, great name. West Ham are even better at wasting money than us. Yeah, they are. And in recent years, the last sort of 18 months, United haven't wasted money, I wouldn't say, but historically, over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, West Ham have wasted some serious money on some players who you think, ooh, that's not a bad signing for them if they can get the best out of them, and they never do. Woodward has cleverly for once downplayed United transfer strength recently. Mind games have begun. Potentially, yeah. Did you ever find that gif of the man tickling the fish? Bloody hell, that's an old reference. Yeah, I did, yeah. You just Google man tickling fish and you'll find it. It's great. I think he was one of the blonde fellas in Die Hard. Do you know something? I have to admit, I've never seen Die Hard, any of the Die Hards, which is pretty shameful. I appreciate. If we don't get Sancho, do you think we should go for an alternative or wait for next season? I think what we did in the last summer was very shrewd, in that we just got the players who were available that we wanted. So we needed a centre-back, we got a centre-back. We needed a right-back, we got a right-back. We needed a winger. We thought Dan James is available. He's only 20 million. He probably won't play every game, but he'll be a good backup. He ended up playing every game because we don't have any other players in that position. I think now we are getting to a point where we need someone. I think this season, when you say, should we wait a season? I think this season was the wait a season. And I think if Sancho isn't available now, the only reason is because he's going somewhere else. Because Dortmund are willing to sell, and United are willing to buy him. So if we don't get him, I think it's because he's gone somewhere else. I don't think there's... I mean, again, I could be wrong and anything can happen, especially with coronavirus and all that sort of stuff. Everything changes. If he isn't at United next season, he won't be... If he's not at United, he'll be at another club. I can't imagine him being at Dortmund next year because, like I said, they're willing to sell him. United want to buy him. So I think there's no real chance that they're like, we're going to keep hold of him for one more year, come again next year. I just don't see that happening personally. And I think if that did happen, we should probably start to look elsewhere because that you can't wait. You can't just keep waiting 1, 2, 3 seasons for one single player because at some point you're ruining the chances of your own team to win trophies and win titles. And especially when a manager's life cycle is so short these days at clubs, I don't think Solskjaer can risk 2.5 seasons of his own tenure at Old Trafford, which is more than most people would give him a chance of having, even at the start of his reign, or even at the start of this season. I don't think he can risk that amount of time before getting that final piece. I think if we ain't getting Sancho this season, we have to turn somewhere else and get a different right winger, would be my opinion personally. I have a feeling the only way Sancho gets out of Dortmund this season is if he puts in a transfer request. I think the whole transfer request thing, I think generally is more of a sort of a media and a kind of it's to make fans think, oh, it's not the club's fault we're selling this player, because it's very easy for a player to let a club know behind the scenes what they're, if Sancho goes up to Zorc and goes, Grandmaster Zorc, please allow me into your sort of truth pod, and he walks in there, and whatever sort of space age technology someone called Zorc must have, and he walks in there and he goes, I'd really like a move to Man United. That's not a transfer request like written, please can I leave please because I don't like it anymore. It's that is as good as a transfer request, but you don't have to be an official transfer request. I think often the whole transfer request thing is so that a club can make it seem like they tried their best to keep a player, but you know what, we hold our hands up. He has to leave. He has to officially to leave with a transfer request, so we've got to let him go. I just think it's been made clear that Sancho would like to leave at this point, and hopefully United can clean that deal up. If not Sancho, then who? Traore. Personally, for me, I'm not that keen on Traore. I think he's quite easy to stop. I think other than his pace, I know he's got good dribbling as well, but his end product just isn't good enough for me. And I think he's one of those players. He's great as a sub. He's great for someone like Wolves, who he doesn't even play every week for them still. He had a great run of games where he was scoring and getting, more assists, more goals, and then he's dropped right off again. I think that will be something that goes with him throughout his whole career. And not that he couldn't turn that around and become much more consistent. We've seen players do that. But I would rather wait for the evidence of that before we spent big money on him, because he's one of those players that he's sort of become, because he's so strong and he's so big and he's got these giant thighs and he's so fast, he's almost become a more popular player than how good he is, if you know what I mean. There are plenty of players who have got the similar sorts of stats to him that aren't nearly as sort of in the culture and in the public eye as he is, and I think that would command a transfer fee in excess of his talent, and for that reason I'd rather go somewhere else. Traore is a bulky Dan James. Exactly, and I think that's a great way to finish. We're going to be back this afternoon for the Paddock podcast, so be sure to check that out at 4 o'clock. It doesn't work. 4 o'clock for that one. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day, everyone. It's the 28th of April again. I'll say it again. I've said it once. I've said it 1,000 times. It's the 28th of April. Thanks very much for joining me. Hope you all have a lovely day, and we'll see you at 4 o'clock for the podcast.